Christmas television in the UK has always been something special, and this year in 2024 the Christmas Day schedule will feature The Weakest Link and Strictly Come Dancing Christmas specials on BBC One, The Great Christmas Bake Off on Channel 4, the debut of the new Wallace and Gromit film Vengeance Most Foul, a celebrity Christmas special of The Chase, and the long-awaited finale of Gavin and Stacey, as well as a whole host of incredible Christmas movies as you would expect. While this year's lineup promises plenty of festive cheer and entertainment, there's something quite nostalgic about revisiting Christmas specials of the past. And for me, one show stands out above the rest as the ultimate Christmas treat: The Crystal Maze. These Christmas specials were not actually shown on Christmas Day itself, usually on Christmas Eve or just after Christmas, and offered kids the chance to crack the crystal maze themselves, something that every child dreamed of being able to do back in the 90s, myself very much included. So in this video, we're going to have a bit of fun and take a look back at the 5 Christmas specials of The Crystal Maze, reliving some memorable moments from each episode. Before we begin, I would appreciate it if you could take a moment to like the video, and if you enjoy my content, hitting that subscribe button would be a huge help. Now get yourselves comfortable as we take a look back at the Christmas specials of The Crystal Maze. Despite not originally being envisioned as a children's TV show, over 40% of The Crystal Maze's viewers were under 16, which is something that came as a surprise to the crew and original host Richard O'Brien. So it was no surprise that after the first series aired in the spring of 1990, the show's producers got to work on putting together a first Christmas special featuring a team of children. Children who wanted to appear on the Christmas special had to complete an application form, and I'd like to say a huge thank you to Phil Newton England for this footage of one of the original application forms, this one for the 1994 Christmas special. The application form states that children had to be between 10 and 15 to appear on the show, and asks for all the expected personal information like name, age, date of birth, address, etc. It then goes on to ask some personality questions, things like what are your interests, how often do you play sports, and do you ever do crosswords or puzzles, before asking a few Crystal Maze related questions, such as why do you think you would make a good Crystal Maze contestant, and from the shows you've seen so far, what is your most memorable moment and why? There's also an interesting question that asks applicants to number the attributes team spirit, leadership, lateral thinking, sense of humor, ability to perform in front of the camera, and confidence from 1 to 6 in order of importance for contestants on the Crystal Maze. Let's have a go at this one ourselves. My answer to this would probably be 1 for team spirit, 2 for confidence, 3 for lateral thinking, 4 for leadership, 5 for sense of humor, and 6 for ability to perform in front of the camera. How would you have ranked these Crystal Maze contestant attributes? Finally, there's a section for the applicant to give their measurements in order for the show to make sure they have the right size attire for the applicant if they are selected. I love this "please be honest" at the bottom of the page. Quite an impressive application form, I think, showing that the show's producers certainly put a lot of thought into what kind of contestants they wanted for the show. Those selected from the application form stage were then invited to an interview either in Birmingham, Manchester, Bath, London, Cardiff, Edinburgh, Norwich, Brighton, or Newcastle, and I would love to know more about what went on in these interviews and how the production team whittled the applicants down to the final contestants. Once again, a huge thanks to Phil Newton England for the footage of this application form. Check out his channel linked in the description below for lots of Crystal Maze related content. Each Christmas special of The Crystal Maze played out exactly the same as the main series, with the only difference being the contestants. So let's now take a look back through each of the show's Christmas specials, which took place between the Christmases of 1990 and 1994. The first Christmas special aired on New Year's Day 1991, just a couple of months before Series 2 kicked off. We get the usual opening monologue from Richard at the start of the show, and it looks like one of the production staff is visible standing to the left of the camera. Our team for this first episode consists of Christine Rutkowski from Nottingham, Deborah Burrett from London, John Newell from Scarborough, William Mayer from Worcester, Catherine Lawrence from Yate, and the team captain Michael Underwood from Northampton. You might actually recognize Michael, as he's gone on to have a successful career as a television presenter, having worked on CBBC and CITV, as well as being the third jungle guide on Jungle Run. The team start their quest through the Crystal Maze in Aztec after paddling up through the river to enter the zone. Michael kicks us off with Feed the God, in which he must feed all of the available gold coins into the statue's mouth in order for the crystal to be released. Michael seemed to be taking it a bit too slow though and wasn't able to retrieve the crystal, escaping the room with just 1 second to spare. Next, William has set a mental game, Water Sacks, where he must shoot arrows at the targets on some sacks, which when hit will release water that would tip the scales and release the crystal. William wasn't a very good marksman though and wasn't able to get any of the arrows he fired on target. The last game in the Aztec zone was the mystery game Build the God, where Christine basically just had to build a totem pole to release the crystal. A relatively simple game, and the team were able to pick up their first crystal before heading on to the industrial zone. The team were unfortunately unsuccessful in every game in this zone, including Titanic, where the player must guide a boat around a maze to retrieve the crystal, Ball Roll, a game that was only ever played this one time during the show's entire run, Combination Cubes, what looked like a relatively simple puzzle game, and finally BB Gun Targets, a generic target shooting game. With still just one crystal, the team move on to the third zone, Medieval. William was able to secure the team's second crystal in this skill game, where you have to move the cubes to make sure that there are no identical symbols on any of the sides of the tower. John failed in this domino game that required each side of the square to have the same number of dots. And then Christine meets Mumsy for some questions. I know they're just kids, but the questions they were posed were super easy. Luckily, she was able to get the third question right and won the team's third crystal. The team's last game in this zone, Wall Maze, was played by Captain Michael, where he must spin the maze to guide the crystal to the opening at the end. Another unsuccessful attempt, and the team go on to the final zone, Futuristic, with only 3 crystals in the bag. 3 games were played in the Futuristic zone. First up is Blow Basketball, a game that I think looks incredibly difficult and unpredictable, but Deborah was able to complete it with a minute to spare, the team's 4th crystal, giving them 20 seconds in the Crystal Dome. Another skill game next for Catherine called Hidden Magnets, where she must guide the ball bearings around the maze into the holes in the middle, but take the wrong path and the ball could become stuck to the maze floor by some powerful magnets hidden underneath. I'm not gonna lie, this game looks incredibly cruel, and 2 minutes is definitely not enough time. The final game is a mental game for John called Logic Pyramid, a very easy game if you can figure out what needs to be done quickly enough. Luckily, John was able to place the shapes correctly to form a pyramid and win the team's 5th and final crystal. With each zone complete, it's time for the Crystal Dome. But with only 25 seconds of time, can the team collect enough gold tokens to be successful? The team enter the dome and begin scrambling for tokens as the fans start. But 25 seconds just isn't enough time, and the team end the show with 87 gold and 24 silver for a final total of 63. Not enough for the big prizes, and the team go away with the customary I cracked the Crystal Maze crystal. But Richard decides that the team did so well that they should indeed win the big prize, gifting them a trip to the Asterisk theme park in France. A great end to the first Christmas special of the Crystal Maze. The second Christmas special aired on Christmas Eve 1991. Can you just imagine sitting down to watch this on Christmas Eve with all the presents under the tree, awaiting the big day tomorrow? They just don't make TV like this anymore. Our team for this quest through the maze are Craig Palfrey from Cardiff, Sonali Dutta from Barnsley, Kate Riley from Shepton Mallet, Stephen Pill from Tamworth, Paul Rowan from Stannington, And finally, the team captain Anna McWilliam from Kingswell. This episode starts in the same way as the last Christmas special, with a trip up the river into the Aztec zone. Kate is up for the first physical game, Pendulum, where the aim of the game is to swing a pendulum so that it cuts through a rope suspending a block of stone, which when cut drops the crystal. Not enough force on the swing though, and the team are unsuccessful in the first game. Next is Craig, who takes on Slingshot, a game very similar to Gag the Gods, but in this game you have to fire stones from a slingshot into the mouths of the statues. A great effort from Craig, who is able to hit all 3 of the statues' mouths, winning the first crystal for the team. We then see Paul unsuccessfully attempt to untangle a large rope to retrieve the key to the crystal. And finally, team captain Anna takes on a murder mystery game, where she must find a series of clues throughout the room that will lead her to the crystal. Great game this, and Anna was able to secure the team's second crystal before moving on to Zone 2, which is the Industrial Zone. Another vehicle driving game up next, this time controlling a toy train carrying the crystal. 3 minutes for this game, and our man Steven was able to complete it in under 2 minutes. That's 3 crystals for the team. Next, Sonali takes on the mystery game Windsurfing, which seems to be using the same air blower that was used in the previous Christmas special game Blow Basketball. Sonali unfortunately wastes about 40 seconds of her 2.5 minutes trying to figure out what to actually do, time that would have been very valuable as she got very close to retrieving the crystal in this game. The last game in this zone is Math Safe, possibly one of the easiest games I've ever seen, even for kids. Simply do the calculations and turn the dials to open the safe. Upon retrieving the crystal, Paul goes back to grab a wad of cash from the safe as well. We move on to the medieval zone next, where the team are able to win 2 crystals. First by successfully answering one of Auntie Sabrina's questions, and then in the puzzle game Playing Cards. In the other 2 games in this zone, Water Wheel and Blackballed, the players were not able to win the crystals, meaning the team move on to the final zone, Futuristic, with a total of 6 crystals. Can they add more time for the Crystal Dome? Well, they get off to a good start in the Futuristic zone, as Paul was able to complete the game Push the Barrels, yet another remote-controlled vehicle game, but this one looks like a lot of fun. The penultimate game saw Kate fail in the game Balloon Shoot, before the final game before the Crystal Dome, where Steven unfortunately got himself locked in after making 3 mistakes on a very difficult game. The team were then given the decision as to whether or not to buy him back out, and I think they made the right decision to do so and to go to the Crystal Dome as a full team. With their 30 seconds in the Crystal Dome, the team were able to collect 78 gold tokens, but 106 silver, giving them a final score of -28. A valiant effort from the team, and we get a somber mood in front of the dome as Richard hands out the crystals to the contestants. But then, Richard answers a call on his absolute brick of a mobile phone from Mumsy, who tells him to give the big prize to the team anyway, which was a weekend in Euro Disney. The team are ecstatic, and it's another great ending to an excellent Christmas special. The Christmas special of 1992 opened with this little clip showing Mumsy returning to the maze and shouting "Ricky, Mumsy's home" before the opening credits roll. Mumsy had not featured in the previous series, where we instead had Auntie Sabrina. We then get our usual welcome from O'Brien and the introduction to the team, which this time around consists of Michael Sprott from Newcastle, David Hetherington from Bromley in London, Becky Day from County Durham, Averil McWilliams from Solihull, Stephen Holden from Swindon, and the captain Joanna Rawlinson from Hatfield. We start out this episode in the new Ocean Zone, which replaced the Industrial Zone, and this would be our first look at this new zone before the start of Series 4 the following year. I always quite liked this zone, particularly the games involving water, as the zone name would suggest. Entrance to the maze begins with this climb down a cargo net before our first game, Gorge the Sharks, where David has to fill the sharks' mouths with water using a water cannon to turn a wheel that will eventually release the crystal. But every drop of water that misses the shark's mouth goes into a separate channel that makes the wheel turn in the wrong direction. For some reason, David wanted to leave the room at 45 seconds, presumably mishearing what the team were shouting at him. But he then returns to the water cannons and is able to win the team's first crystal. A great start. Next up is another murder mystery clue search game, this time underwater. Michael swims into a pirate's cave and follows a series of clues around the room until he eventually finds the crystal inside the treasure chest. 2 games down, 2 crystals won. One more game in this zone called Jet Lag, played by Captain Joanna, where she has to simply put the correct times on the cities on a map. She seriously struggles with the first one though, and wastes so much time that she has basically no chance after that. Nevertheless, 2 crystals from the first zone isn't bad. On to zone 2 now, which is medieval. The team start out with Mumsy's questions and are able to answer the very first question correctly to win their 3rd crystal. Mumsy then gives Richard a telling off for buying the wrong crackers before giving all the kids some presents. Next up is a skill game for Stephen called Bowling for Crystals. This is one of my favourite games on the Crystal Maze. Stephen has to roll cannonballs down a chute to hit spikes on a pole which turns and raises the crystal up. After a few good hits, Stephen is able to retrieve the crystal, bringing their total to 4. Can they complete a perfect zone? Well, in the final game in Medieval, a physical game called Crystal Cage, Michael has to make it through the cage maze to reach the crystal and bring the cage holding the crystal back to the entrance to unlock it. This is very innovative, having a maze where some of the walls move, and with just 15 seconds remaining, Michael is able to escape the room with the crystal. 5 crystals out of a possible 6. Excellent work. Next up is the futuristic zone, where 4 games were played. The team were unsuccessful at the game Put Those Lights Out, which, although just a memory game, is probably very difficult under pressure, and Pop the Balloons, a physical game with the object of popping balloons to retrieve a series of clues that lead to the crystal. However, they were able to retrieve 2 more crystals from this zone in the other 2 games played. Firstly, in the game Air Hockey, Richard made the game a lot easier than normal. Usually the player has to get all 3 coloured pucks into their respective goals, but Richard said this time she only had to get 1. A very difficult game this, but with this easier target, team captain Joanna was able to win the team's 6th crystal. Then in pressure pads, David was able to make it 7. I'm pretty sure the object of this game is to put a weight of 1 on all 4 pressure pads, using the 2 weight to press down on 2 pads at the same time. But instead, David just dragged one of the pads over and stood on it to be able to retrieve the crystal in just 45 seconds. Nevertheless, an impressive 8 crystals so far, with 1 more zone left to play. Another 4 games in this final zone. First up was Symbol Chain, which is a kind of dominoes game where the player has to place the tiles so that adjacent symbols match. A tricky game this, with just 2 minutes to complete it, and David was unfortunately too slow. Becky was able to secure the 8th crystal in just 1 minute in the game Good Balls, Bad Balls, another excellent game that you can actually play in the Crystal Maze video game. It's a lot of fun. Unfortunately, no more crystals were to be had in the final 2 games. First, in the Crystal Flap, Michael wasn't able to solve the puzzle in time, and lastly, in Gag the Gods, Avril was able to get balls in 3 of the statues' mouths, but ran out of time to get the 4th. And so it's on to the Crystal Dome with 8 crystals, 40 seconds of time. With all 6 team members and that much time, the team were able to collect a whopping 164 gold and 55 silver for a grand total of 109. Their grand prize was a weekend together at an action-adventure centre to do things like climbing, sailing, archery and abseiling, and of course they all received the customary crystal to take home with them. An excellent episode, this one. The 4th Christmas special, broadcast on Christmas Eve 1993, starts out with a short clip of Richard O'Brien writing a letter to the new maze master Ed Tudor Pole. This would be the final appearance for Richard on the original run of the Crystal Maze, and Ed's first show as host. Richard says his final farewell to the viewers, reassuring them that he has left the maze in safe hands before riding off on a very impressive looking motorcycle with Mumsy. And thus the Ed Tudor Pole era of the Crystal Maze was ushered in. Filling O'Brien's shoes was never going to be easy, and I know there are some who don't like Ed as host, but for me, I thought he was an outstanding replacement. Let's check out his first episode at the helm. Our team on this episode is Kenny O'Brien from Edinburgh, my hometown, Ifran Hanif from Bolton, Emma Rutledge from Wickford, Helen Coleman from Winsford, Katrina Williams from London, and our captain is Kenneth Murray from Larkhall in Lanarkshire. It's back into the boats to paddle up the river into Aztec for our first zone. Emma is up first for a mystery game, and she looks so happy to be on this show. This must have been an incredible experience for these kids. Her game is Dinosaur Jigsaw, where she simply has to put the dinosaur skeleton back together. Great work from her in this game, and the team are off to a good start, winning their first crystal. Team captain Kenneth takes the next game, called 8 Balls. I think this game is probably quite easy with a bit of practice. Simply get the balls into the holes on either side. But Kenneth was unfortunately only able to get 6 balls in. Pontoon Bridge is next for Kenny. The object of this game is to build a bridge to the other side and then spin the wheel to move the water onto a chute that releases the crystal. Another great game, and Kenny secures the second crystal for the team. The last game in this zone is Rickety Bridge, where you have to pull levers to move a small bridge that contains the crystal. Helen just seemed to be pulling the levers back and forth though, with no real rhythm, and she was not able to retrieve the crystal from this game. On to the futuristic zone next for 3 games. First, Emma gets another go and attempts the game Flick Sum, where you have to change the numbers to create a correct calculation. About 40 seconds were wasted at the start here trying to figure out what to do, leaving not enough time to complete the game. Ifrin is up next for another murder mystery game. A lot of help from Ed on this one, and the clues weren't really all that difficult. A third crystal secured for the team. Katrina takes on the final game in this zone, House of Cards. Pretty self-explanatory this one, and the team secure their 4th crystal in no time. Great work so far after 2 zones, and next it's on to the medieval zone. Helen takes on the first game in this zone, Mead Shoot, where she must fire corks at targets on barrels of mead. Hitting these targets releases liquid, and enough liquid needs to be poured into the monk's mouth to release the crystal. Helen actually did really well in this game, and with just a few seconds to spare, the crystal comes rolling down. But she was just a second too late getting out and was unfortunately locked in. The team decide to leave her in there and come back later. Ifrin takes on the mystery game Black Knight next, where he has to put the shapes into the table to complete a route for the White Knight to rescue the damsel and for the Black Knight to go to the gallows. And Ifrin absolutely bossed this game, literally just putting the blocks in the perfect locations right away, as if he'd played this game before. An easy crystal for the team, and they decide to use this one to rescue Helen. Captain Kenneth tries the last game in this zone, Spiral Maze, but isn't able to win another crystal to make up for the one they just spent. And so it's on to the Ocean Zone for our last set of games, and Katrina has a go at Stoke the Boiler, where she has to literally stoke the boiler by simply turning a wheel and pulling a lever. Not the most difficult of games, and another crystal for our team, taking the total to 5. Kenneth takes on the penultimate game, Skull and Crossbones, where the object is to cover a skull and crossbones with red discs. A simple idea for a game, but there just isn't enough time, and Kenny fails to retrieve the crystal. Can the team get one more before the Crystal Dome? Captain Kenneth decides he wants to try to redeem himself and win a crystal for the team. He takes on the game Battle Stations, a very impressive looking game that actually isn't all that difficult. Simply shoot 3 of the ships to win the crystal. But Kenneth kept us on the edge of our seats as he left it until the last minute to complete the game and win the crystal. And so, with 6 crystals and 30 seconds of time, it's time for the Crystal Dome. The team enter the dome and begin their mad scramble, and it looks as though they've collected quite a lot of tokens, but is it enough to win? Well, Ed informs the team that they collected a whopping 272 tokens in total, but 144 were gold and 128 were silver, resulting in a grand total of 16. Not enough to win the grand prize, but in typical Christmas special fashion, Ed throws away the rulebook and awards the big prize anyway. The team are off to visit Lapland in northern Finland to go skiing, tobogganing, sledging, riding snow scooters, and to meet Father Christmas if he's not too busy. What an incredible prize this is, and I'm sure they all had an incredible time. I thought this was an excellent episode, and Ed did really well for his first time out as host. Unfortunately, there would only be one more Christmas special the following year. It's Christmas Eve 1994, and it's time for the final Christmas special of The Crystal Maze. Our team of intrepid adventurers this time around are Nick Baird from Aberdeen, S.A. Wegby from London, Karina Watson from Weston-super-Mare, Matthew Masters from Ashford, Alistair Burrows from Hertfordshire, and our team captain Cherry Ruegg from Stowmarket in Suffolk. A row down the river again for the Aztec Zone, and SA starts us off with the skill game Basketball, where the aim of the game is to score 3 baskets by hitting the ball from underneath the canvas sheets. This is a very difficult game, I think, so difficult in fact that later in Series 6 they reduced the goal to only 2 baskets. SA was able to get 1 basket, but not enough to win the crystal. Celestial Temples is next for Nick, and in this game he has to switch the starting positions of the sun and the moon on the board by dragging them and various other celestial bodies around. This is a very easy game if you know the pattern to solve it, but with only 2.5 minutes, Nick wasn't able to figure it out, and the team must wait for their first crystal. Karina attempts the final game in this zone, Sun Wheels, where she must roll the crystal from the back of the cell across the wheels in between. She failed on the first attempt, but then masterfully collected the crystal on her second attempt, winning the game in just over 1 minute. Futuristic Zone next, and Captain Cherry puts forward Matthew to attempt the mystery game Operate the Robot. The name of the game explains exactly what he has to do: operate the robot to collect the crystal. A great idea for a game this, but Matthew wasn't able to get the robot to do what he wanted and didn't win the crystal. Cherry decides to go for another mystery game with Alistair. This time it's Atom Mirrors, a game that was designed specifically for this episode only. Alistair has to choose the right mirrors from the molecule-like structures on the back of the wall, and these mirrors allow him to read a 5-digit security code which would release the crystal. With only a few seconds to spare, Alistair retrieved the team's second crystal. Karina then takes on the game Rope Shapes, another game that only featured in this one episode. She has to answer a question from the computer and then thread a rope through hooks on a large board. When completed, this rope would form one of the constellations on the opposite wall, which concealed the crystal. A simple game this one, and Karina came away with the team's third crystal as we move on to the last game in this zone, Crystal Credits, with Captain Cherry. The aim of the game is to crawl around the maze and collect power units which displayed numbers. But when these power units were removed, this number would gradually decrease and needed to be plugged in again at the end. Collecting 100 or more power wins you the crystal. Cherry caught on to this game right away, but was a little too slow in collecting the power units, eventually exiting the game with 40 seconds still remaining, fearing a lock-in. On to the third zone, which is Medieval. 3 games were played in this zone, with the team collecting just 1 more crystal. SA took on the first game, Egg in the Tree, and although she retrieved the egg that needed to be unlocked to release the crystal, there just wasn't enough time to get the key in, and she exited the room with no crystal. After this, Cherry took on Flag Crosshairs, a mystery game that involves matching pairs of flags to create a crosshair that reveals the location of the crystal. Far too much shouting from the team here. Cherry just needed to be focused on the game at hand and match the shapes, and this would have been an easy crystal. The next game, however, proved to be a little more fruitful, as Matthew was able to succeed in the game Conveyor Belt to win the team's 4th crystal. 4 crystals isn't bad at this stage. Can they win a few more in the final Ocean Zone? Alistair takes on the mental game Octopus Tentacles, where he must line up the octopus's tentacles to allow the crystal to fall out of its mouth. A very easy game this one, once you figure out that the spots on the octopus reveal the exact location each section needs to be turned to. A 5th crystal for the team. Essay takes on the penultimate game, Clockface, a game that doesn't need much of an explanation, but she was far too slow in placing the pieces in the correct place to win another crystal. Just one more game left as Nick takes on Submarine Sucking, where he has to control a Hoover-like contraption to suck up the sand, obscuring a sign showing the location of the crystal, after which he can use the vacuum to suck up the crystal itself. Some expert maneuvering from Nick wins the team's 6th and final crystal. But how will they fare in the dome? After a valiant effort in the dome with 30 seconds of time, the team were able to collect 109 gold tokens and 165 silver, giving them a total of -56. But of course, as could be expected by now, Ed decides to award them all with the grand prize anyway, which is a trip to a theme park in France. A great end to another excellent Christmas special. With the Crystal Maze holding a very special place in my heart, it has been an absolute treat to look back at these excellent Christmas specials. And I hope you have all enjoyed this nostalgic look back at a time when Christmas television was a little bit more fun and enjoyable. We all would have loved nothing more than for the Crystal Maze to have continued in its original run past the 6 series that it ran for, but at least we've had a reboot in recent years, albeit only lasting for 3 years. I think the appetite is there for this show to return once again, and while there's no news yet of a potential future reboot, it is certainly something we can hope for in the future. But for now, at least we have this incredible bank of episodes to look back on for years to come. Many thanks for watching, everyone. This is my last video for 2024, and I would like to say a huge thank you to all of you for watching and supporting the channel. To think that I started this year with under 500 subscribers and we're ending it with over 13,000 is mind-boggling. I've got plenty more content in the pipeline for 2025, and I hope you will all join me on the ride. A very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you all. Thanks again, everyone, and I'll see you in 2025.